Hey everyone, Anthony here. Today I have a really fun conversation with Marissa Dahlson. Marissa is the Director of Talent Success at Cribl and a mother of three. We had a talk about a lot of great topics, including things I don't normally cover. We talked about her being in a two-mom household and building a family in a same-sex couple. We talk about the importance of repair in relationships and the impact that we have on our kids. A lot of great stuff. I appreciate you listening. If you would click the follow button, leave me a rating. That would really mean the world to me. It's the best way to help grow the podcast. Anyway, on to the show. Welcome back to the Successful Working Parents Podcast, the podcast where we talk to successful working parents, if you can believe that. My guest today, she is the Director of Talent Success at Cribl. She's a mother of three. Ladies and gentlemen, Marissa Dahlson. Marissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Anthony. I'm happy to be with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you today as well. So, we usually kick off with just a quick intro on your career, if you would share that with us.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I like to say that I'm an accidental HR professional. I ended up here completely unintentionally, and I feel very fortunate and lucky that I love what I do. I started off wanting to be in the applied behavioral psychology area. I wanted to work with autistic kiddos and work in classrooms. And what I noticed when I started doing that work is that one, I was going to burn out really quickly. I really respect folks who can do that, and it's so necessary. Actually, my oldest son is autistic, so we work with those professionals now, and I have so much respect for those folks who do that. And the other thing I noticed was that when I was in the classroom and there was like a breakdown in communication from the administration, that it really impacted the teachers and that impacted the environment in the classroom. And so I thought, how can I still help and be involved? I want to do that at a systems level. And so that's how I found organizational psychology. I went to school for that, assuming I'd go back and work in schools or in hospitals. Found something called HR business partnering in corporate America, and I kind of didn't leave. That's where I entered. I had a really great mentor early on in my career who pulled me aside and said, MD, at work I go by MD. MD, you can be anything. Like, I see all this potential in you. Which path? You can go into, organizational development, which is a path within HR. You can go into employee relations. You can go into HR systems. Like, what are you interested in? And I will help you get there. And I told her I wanted eventually to be in talent, which is where I am now. I wanted to work with people, helping them grow and develop and grow their careers and learn new skills and just honestly have fun at work. We spend so much time at work, but I said that's end game. I want to start in HR business partnering. So I started there and kind of navigated my career in that way, and just have been very fortunate to have people along the way tell me that they saw something in me and help me progress.
Awesome. So, tell us a little bit more about your role as mom and your family life.
Yeah. So my wife and I have three young kids. Our firstborn was born in September 2019. So he's about to be 4. I almost can't believe it. We spent a lot of time being a two mom household. We spent a lot of time talking about like what that would look like. Back when I went to grad school, my wife and I were together at the time. We actually sat down and had a conversation, Anthony, about how me going to grad school would impact what might happen when we had kids. Because at the time, she was the primary earner. Again, I was going to school, and I would have loved to have been a stay at home parent. I think it's one of, if not the hardest job there is. And we kind of decided at that point I was going to go to grad school. My earning potential might end up being more than hers long term. So once we had kids, would be the primary earner. So even over 10 years ago when I was going to school and we were having those conversations. So when our son came along, um, I I took leave. I took parental leave, but I kept working. And my wife is now a stay-at-home mom. She takes care of all of our three kids. It's again a very hard job, and we really try to split a lot of the responsibilities. So she takes care of the kids. She does, I would say, a lot of the mental load of like what their like health appointments look like with the doctors. However, I know who their doctors are. I have taken them all to the pediatrician before. I know who my son's behavioral therapist is. I know what size clothes they wear, but my wife does the laundry. I do the cooking. We meal plan kind of together, but that's how we split responsibilities. And we check in about it constantly to make sure that everyone is feeling good. We even, Anthony, in the mornings, we switch off sometimes. Like she'll sleep in and I'll get up with the kids and get them ready for the day, take my son to preschool and then come back home, log into work, and her workday will begin as my workday begins. So yeah, it's just a constant conversation.
Did anything surprise you about those roles, like maybe before you had kids and what the roles were like, and then what they became after, or was it pretty clear, like, okay, I'm probably going to be the one that does X, Y, and Z, and you're probably going to be the one that does ABC?
That's a really good question. It actually really surprised me how once I went back to work. So particularly with our oldest, he was born a little bit early, so I took some additional unpaid time off because he was in the NICU. Once I went back to work and I was in an office, it was so quick how I started just how much better my wife knew him than I did. Like I had spent this first 3 months like knowing everything, like every little sound he made, every and then I went back to work and I would come home and like I missed the first time he rolled over. Uh, I had a very kind colleague say to me at work as I was literally crying on my desk because I missed it. It was the first week back. And she said, there's always going to be a first time for you. Like there will always be a first for you. And that was so kind. But I had to really intentionally then, when I was home with him, spend time, and now with my twins, like really spend time not letting distance grow because it what surprised me is how easy it was to just fall into this like, oh, my wife knows. Oh, her name is Brittany. She goes by B. Oh, B knows how to do that. B is going to take care of that. Like that, it was really easy for me to slip into that role. That really surprised me. Because again, we're two women. I was like, oh, we're super progressive. Like that's no way that's going to happen. And it was,
Sure.
yeah, it happened quickly.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife's like petrified that I'm going to be the favorite, and that our daughter's just going to like me more. Even though I mean, she's not. I'm not necessarily home the stay-at-home dad, although I would like
Yeah,
to be. But I
yeah,
think she just has this fear of like me knowing just exactly what you're saying, like me knowing the baby better and that
yeah.
kind of stuff. What do you think is what do you think is different about the way you might approach things being in a two mom household, and what do you think is really the same
Mm,
as a maybe a more traditional mom dad household?
yeah. One of the things I think that is different is that we did really have to talk about what roles we wanted to have. Um, and what like we really I like to say we got to play around with like what that looked like for us in our household and even my my wife went away. She was gone this weekend celebrating her sisters down in LA and I stayed home with the kids and took care of them. And she is the youngest of five sisters and three of whom are married to men and have kids. Their kids are older, and uh, her mom, my wife's mom, kept saying like, "This, this is not something that I could have ever done." And her sisters, "This is not really something." Like it was an easy yes for me to
Yeah.
just be like, "Yeah, of course, go. Like I've got it. You take care of three kids all the time. I know how to take care of our kids. Like it's fine." I do think that's a little different. I see people in my life who have that, more traditional mom dad household or um, like really have to leave a list, have to say like here's where everything is. Like I know all those things. And it every household is different, so what works for people works, but I've seen people just not have the conversation and just assume and fall into the roles,
Mhm.
right? And so because we're two women, we had the opportunity to talk about what would work for us. As far as like what has been the same, I do think this is a little bit of a trope, but you mentioned it, Anthony. Like, I think this is probably what happens for the parent who gets to go away and, I close my bedroom door, I get to work, and then I get to come out and I get to play. with the kids, right? So like I am the fun parent, and my wife said before our kids were born, she was like, "You're going to be the fun parent. I just know." And I was like, "Well, one, I have playful energy, so that makes sense. But two, like of course, naturally the parent who's going to go away is not doing the day-to-day and the hour to hour, minute to minute, accountability, just all of those things. Like I get the couple of hours before bed and a couple hours in the morning, and I get to play more.
Yeah.
That has been stayed very true. I think a lot of the dads in my life, or a lot of the working parents that I interact with, who then come into that role, and their kids love to play with them as like the fun parent.
Yeah, yeah. I think some of those roles just have to just naturally develop. It is probably more so based on where you are, more so than who you are in those cases, right? Or what
Exactly.
you're doing. Me and my wife
Exactly.
were just talking about this because we always discuss who's going to be the more of the disciplinarian, because
Yeah.
she's actually a principal, so she obviously has
Oh
that
man.
that bone in her body, but she's
Sure.
also I'm definitely more of like the just anal in general, and just more of the household rule enforcer between the two of us. So we're
Yeah.
really, I'm like, I think it's gonna be me. I think you're gonna be the one that lets her do whatever she wants, and I'm gonna be the one that's the bad guy. But we'll see. I'm
Yeah.
curious to see how it plays out.
Yeah. And what's I think uh cool as well for us is that, and for any, parent, is that you don't have it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can both agree on where the boundary is, where the line is, and to do it consistently so that it's not, you being the bad guy or your wife being, or like in our case, like again, I have a different level of tolerance for things, right? So my wife and I calibrate all the time on like we need to be a united front
Yeah,
on what's important in our house and where we will set the boundary, like around screen time or the tablet, for example, is
sure.
a
Yeah.
hot one in our household right
Oh
now.
yeah. Can't wait for that one. Can't wait for that one to come up.
Future you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so you have three kids, all under four, including twins,
Yes.
and you have a full time job. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Like, how do you juggle the two? What have you found? What surprised you when you first started it, and what have you found to be successful?
This is an evolution, I would say. 1 to 3, we say that it feels like it escalated quickly. 1 to 3
That's
versus
a
one
big
to
jump.
two.
I know.
It was a big jump. We were like, we've got this, and we do. Like, we're very grateful for the kids that we have. Um, it's a constant conversation, Anthony. So we really do check in on what my work schedule is. We do a Sunday evening like meeting, like household meeting, where we talk about logistics, how things are going, what's coming up for work that week for me, or what appointments the kids have. My typical work schedule is around 8:30 or 9 to 4:30 or 5, and then I log off. I'm cooking dinner. I set like pretty clear boundaries with my team, and my boss and my colleagues around like family is the most important thing to me. And so like here's when I can be reached, here's what an emergency looks like at work. And by the way, because I work now in like more of the fun HR, there's rarely an emergency, truly. So uh people don't have my cell phone number unless they absolutely need it. But that's been an evolution. I had a mentor and leader before I had kids say to me that like a company is going to take and take and take and take everything that you give it, and nobody is going to set boundaries for you. You have to do it. And that changed a lot for me. I'm particularly young, like being young in my career at that time. This was several years ago, and just hearing that like, oh, I can set the boundaries that work for me, and people will actually respond to that. Now, caveat this, I don't work in sales, right? Like there's different functions within a department within corporate America where that works more effectively than others, right? So but it's definitely a work in progress. One of the things, like being working for a company now, having joined Cribl, where I can be remote first, so I can work from home. I can close my door. I can put my headphones on. I can get shit done, and then I apologize. Can I curse?
Yeah.
The podcast is all right.
Fuck yeah.
Okay, great. And get shit done. And then I can open the door and walk out and go have lunch with my kids, right? Or play with them and then come back in and close the door. But I've gained a lot of time with them because I work for a remote first company, because I work for a company with other working parents. That hasn't always been the case. And I would say for me, that's been a big game changer.
Yeah. I mean, I gotta say, my being able to work from home has made a huge difference for me as well. I couldn't imagine even just adding the commute to the beginning and the end of the day would really take away from it. And similar to you, like in the morning, I'll like share my schedule with my wife and you know, I'll say, hey, I'm free from this time if you need me to do anything or if you need me to fill in for a minute. And so we have a good balance there. But if I was leaving 45 minutes earlier to commute and then gone for the day, it would be a lot harder to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, this is uh, not, there are a lot of really horrible things that have happened as a result of COVID. There are some for me personally, just being like candid, when initially everything shut down and nobody knew what was going on. I was back to work for 4 months and really, really having a hard time having a baby at home and having to be in the office 5 days a week. And so I was relieved to get to be home. Like I remember that and I feel a little bit ashamed to say that like I feel relieved, but I did because I got to be home. I got to wear my son and be on meetings and everyone was like, "Yeah, we're figuring it out together." And I knew at that point I would never go back to being in an office 5 days a week.
Yeah, I mean, again, obviously a lot of bad things came from
Mhm.
COVID, of course, but I think that just showing letting the world see that people could get their work done from
Yeah.
home, and I think just
Mhm.
the need to be in a physical office is different. It is good to go into an office sometimes. My company's like we're like remote only, and so we only see each other off sites and things like that, which is great. So you know, I do see the value in meeting face to face, but it's definitely, especially now that I'm a father, it's you know, shout out to my employer. Like it's just so helpful to have that
Yeah.
option.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so what else? So do you have, you know, any like time management skill suggestions or techniques or like what have you found to like really be helpful in that balance?
I write a lot down. I also have ADHD, so like I have a lot of different over my life pre-parenthood have acquired a lot of time management skills to help me navigate, particularly being a leader, having people report into me, having them need my time and attention in addition then to the strategy and work that I'm driving and then being a good partner and spouse and parent. I every single morning I actually have like these single note cards and I will look at my day, I'll look at my week and I'll write down the most important things that I need to get done today. And I keep a physical notebook as well. I've tried doing this virtually, but I find for me physically helps. And I'll write down like the top 3 to 5 things I need to get done that day. And so then I know when the last one's off the list, it's done. And then whatever else I get done or whatever else that comes up, I can add it to the list for tomorrow. So that's really helped me. And then if I'm in a moment where like I really need to to get something done, I'll turn off my internet and set a timer and uh, like usually 15 to 20 minutes and do like little sprints to try to get chunks of work done. But if I don't write it down, then I find my day dictates where I'm focused versus me dictating where I'm focused in my day.
Yeah. Some of my guests have started to share that they have ADHD as well and they were diagnosed as adults. I'm curious if you had anything to share about your experience with it as a you know, has it affected your role as a mother, has it affected your role in your career? Did you find out recently? Did you find out when you were younger?
Yeah, I was diagnosed when I was 19. So I I was in sports a lot as a kid, so I think that masked a lot of my symptoms. I was pretty high functioning. It ha I have found I have gotten a lot more success out of and more connection, honestly, Anthony, out of my day to day, out of my working world when I disclose that I have ADHD. And so one of the things that I always tell people is like, I have ADHD. You might see me fidgeting. You might see me standing, sitting down if I'm not making eye contact with you, or if I'm writing stuff down. It doesn't mean that I'm not listening. It means that I'm like, trying to focus and pay attention. So at work, that has been really helpful. But I have found once I've disclosed it, I'm able to be a lot more effective. I know not everybody has that option or feels like they don't have, like they're not in an environment where they can share that. But for me, I would say like I was a little nervous too, but now it's no problem for me. And I found more people then disclosing with me, like, me too. These are the
Yeah.
fidgets I use, whatever. So that's been nice from a parenthood perspective. I would say that one's been a lot trickier. My wife and I really like one of the things that we've done, because again, the writing things down, visually seeing it. I do that thing where I'm like, oh, I need to add this to the list. If I don't have my phone right away, to put it in my phone. Like I forget, I'll leave the room and it doesn't happen. And my wife does not have ADHD, so she is learning and has been learning. We've been together for 14 years, how to, navigate life with someone who's neurodiverse. We have a big calendar on our fridge that she ended up buying, and then physical lists and like white. It's like a whiteboard, and we'll write out like the schedule for the week with the kids, like who's doing pickup and drop off for our oldest son, if there are other appointments, if we're scheduling a date night, like we'll write it down. And then if I need to put something on a list, I put it physically on the list because I'm right there in the kitchen. It doesn't require me to be on my phone. That's been really helpful for us as far as like the organizational side of parenthood. And then, as I mentioned earlier, splitting up the tasks, things like remembering to do or having like urgency to do something is not a strength of mine. I'm great when I have a deadline and it's like procrastinate, 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 and then I'll do my best work like the night before
Mhm. Yeah.
something's done. So some of those things in parenthood that require just a diligence and a consistency, she will take the lead on.
I
So
didn't get
like
that.
switching over our kids' clothes when they go to the next side. Like that is on her ticker. That's one thing that's one of the many things that she manages because like I just I it doesn't happen when it's me, right? Or it doesn't
Yeah,
happen effectively. So that's those are just some examples.
sure. Do you think about the way your kids see how you approach your career and your relationship to work? I know your kids are a little young, but your oldest is almost 4 now, and they'll become more and more aware of it. I'm curious if
Mhm.
that's something that's on your mind.
Yes, that's a great question. I think about this a lot. I was very fortunate. Both of my parents were very career driven, are very career driven. They're still working. They're like pretty pretty ambitious people. And my mom in particular is like a global leader at a big company, and like I look up to her tremendously. Growing up, they always worked really hard, prioritized for their careers, but then they showed up for us. Like they would all, I don't remember them ever missing like a band concert that I played in or a sporting competition. Like they didn't like drive us to and from school in the afternoon. Like they didn't make our breakfast in the morning, but they showed up and they worked. And so for me as a parent, that's really important to, and I do think about that a lot. That you can work really hard. I'm not saying you can have it all because you really can't, but you can have what's important to you in the moment, like the most important things, right? So like I work really hard, but I've moved myself into a function within HR where I don't have to be on call 24/7 so that I can show up for my kids because I had that example growing up and it was really impactful for me. And knowing that like I can have this career, I can I can be a leader. I can aspire to, be a chief people officer, which is something I'd love to do. And I can still show up as a parent.
I've also been thinking about just like the impact that you have on your kids, like
Mhm.
psyche, right? Like they're so
Yeah.
impressionable in these
Mhm.
first few years, right? They're so crucial. It seems like how could you not make some mistakes in it, right? I mean,
Oh my gosh.
that's been on my
Yes.
mind. That's been on my mind a lot as well.
Yeah, yes. No, I am not an expert on any of this. I would say like go listen to like Dr. Becky or like a childhood psychology expert. But what I've learned, and I have a background in psychology. I uh know how I do like adult development like as a big part of my career. So I know the psychology behind this and what they found is the most important thing for kids, especially like in this age where their brains are so malleable and they're doing a lot of development, is in the repair. It's in the moments of reconnection when you've messed up. It's in talking about and naming emotions and not leaving it for them to kind of think, because a kid will always think that it's them, it's their fault, it's something they did or whatever. But if you can name it, like I'm feeling frustrated right now and I need to take a breath outside. I'm going to be right back. Like I can be frustrated and still take care of you. Even when they're little, when you're like, there's no way they're absorbing that. That is really important work. Or coming back to your kid, like, I don't remember. I do believe every generation of parent does the best they can with what they have. I didn't grow up in a household where adults apologize to me. Like, it just
Right.
was not really a thing. I'm
Yeah.
sure many of
Same.
us, right, in
Same.
this
Yeah. Yeah.
generation, like,
Yeah.
I actually remember the first time that an adult apologized to me. It was my nanny when I was like, I think I was 10. She had gotten really frustrated. She had yelled at us, and then she came after, a couple minutes, came back into the room and said she was sorry. And my mind was blown. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, this is something that happens.
Yeah.
Adults can apologize. So that repair and reconnection, because we're all, there's going to be stuff that our kids come to us when we're adults. Hopefully, if they, if we've done our jobs right and they still feel connected to us and say like, wow, like, you did this gentle parenting bullshit. Like, I really wish like this is how it it impacted me now and I'm talking to my therapist about it and whatever. Like,
Yeah.
there's gonna be stuff that we do, but the repair is really important. And like managing your own, I guess not managing, regulating your own emotions. That was really surprising for me in becoming a parent, was just how many emotions came to the surface for me all at once.
Yeah. That's funny you say that because I remember my dad like apologizing to me like in my 20s. I don't know if someone talked
Yeah.
to him or he like came around one day, but I remember just thinking like how like odd it was that he called me back and apologized on something. And
Yeah.
he's not listening to this. I don't think he knows what a podcast is, but it was just such a crazy. It was a crazy experience that I don't know what came over him, but I did appreciate it. It definitely made a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
No, I
it's
think
also it's in a similar vein. I've heard a lot about repairing in the couple and like you fight in front of the kids and then you have to make sure that you make up in front of the kids because often you don't. And I can definitely relate to that concept as well. Like you don't see your parents like making up. You just see the issue, the conflict in the moment. So that's something that me and my wife have like both talked about making sure we do, when
yeah,
if and when conflict comes up.
totally. Yeah, and I think, again, if I think about my household growing up, I know like my parents had different home environments where there was more conflict. And so I think, or more open, like anger, for example. So I think for us, how they navigated that was doing it a lot behind closed doors because they didn't want to burden us, right? The way that they had been burdened. But then that's so now as an adult myself and figuring that out with my wife and how we want our household to be, we're kind of learning like, you know, it actually is better, or for us, it's going to work better to show these emotions, to name them, uh, and model that repair. Because I don't know, I think I learned like in college in my psychology classes, like how to like be in conflict with somebody effectively because I didn't have that model. Like my parents, we weren't allowed to slam doors. Like no, there was never nobody was ever angry really like in front of one another, which there were a lot of benefits to. But then, later on. Um, having to like anger is a healthy emotion to have, and learning how, anyways, I
Yeah,
feel like this
totally.
has turned into a little therapy
I
podcast.
know. Yeah, I'm
Did you
feeling better. I'm
appreciate
feeling
that?
better
Yeah,
already.
no, I feel great. It's great to talk about.
I love you, Dad.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mom and Dad, I know that you will be listening to this because I'm going to send it to you. So I love you very much.
yeah, and I love you too, Mom, if you're listening.
Yeah.
Um, so, and we don't have to put this in, but I work for a family building company, and so I am genuinely curious if you wanted to share
Yeah.
your experience just from being in coming from a same sex couple, what your journey was to forming a family, just from the
Yes.
decision making process and how you went about it. Love to hear if you're open to talking about it.
Totally. I'm so happy to talk about it. And uh so again, because we're two women, something like, it was an open conversation from the start. Um we ended up through a lot of there was a lot of I would say like medical ups and downs for my wife. We ultimately decided that we would use my eggs and she would carry. It's something called reciprocal IVF. And initially, we weren't gonna have me do any of that, and I was like fully on board and like okay and feeling great about like being the non-biological mother. That's kind of the language, the biological and then non-bio um, mom, and still feel connected to these kids. Like I was never worried that I wouldn't feel connected. I know a lot of same-sex couples, particularly two women, the non-bio mom. There's a lot of the books I read at the time was about the like existential, will I feel connected to this kid. Um, so we did reciprocal IVF. The really interesting thing, though, at the time, the company I was at, which was like a very big global, pretty progressive company, the way that and I wish I had looked at this before we started family planning. That's what I would say now. If anybody is like on their journey, or they think that they want to have kids, look at your policies and talk to your benefits person, because the way that the policy was written um, for folks going through infertility, which is typically defined medically as 12 consecutive months of trying, excuse me, and not conceiving, um, that is free for same sex, or for heterosexual couples. For same sex couples, that is not free. That's very expensive. And the way that our benefits policy at the time defined it was 6 medicated IUIs, which is an interuterine insemination. That's $1,000 for sperm, about $3,000 to $4,000 depending on where you're going for the IUI itself. So 6 medicated IUIs without conception before you qualified for the benefits. And that was really expensive for us. And from an equity perspective, right? Like I ended up going to our benefit, and was it was just that we didn't have any queer people in the benefits team, or they weren't consulting with our, Pride employee relations group, or we didn't really have parents who, like it was just a lack of perspective in the room. And so once I started having those conversations, and they went to bat for us, because we ended up doing several unmedicated IUIs and then a few medicated IUIs. But by the time you do four, what we know now, by the time you do four IUIs, if it hasn't worked, like you should probably look at going into the next thing. My wife and I did 11. We were in a lot of medical debt. We got some like not great advice from the fertility clinic we went to, who was kind of treating us a little bit like a heterosexual couple. Like, oh no, you just do it we'll just do 12 and then like we'll see. I really wish that we had maybe gotten a second opinion, but hindsight's always 2020. What ended up happening is we ended up one being a lot of debt, but we also then worked with our benefits team. They went to bat for us to fight to get us the coverage that they had, um, we helped them rewrite the policy. And then we also worked with them and a couple other folks who I knew who were like going through surrogacy, who then the parental leave policy at the time was non-birthing parents got 2 weeks. So surrogacy wise, like non-birthing mothers, 2 weeks of parental leave versus for birthing parents, 6 months, 3 months federally, and then 3 months provided by the company. So the disparity there was like it was big, not only for queer couples, but also for folks who were trying to have a family through surrogacy. So I know this feels like a very long version of the story, but we ended up getting the parental leave policy changed as well. So we got the policies for access to the fertility benefit changed because it was very expensive for two women, um, and free for heterosexual couples with no proof required. But anyways, it just took us having the conversation, and I actually at the beginning couldn't believe that for this big global company that I was the first queer parent bringing this to their attention. I could
Totally.
not believe it.
Yeah.
However, like just because it's a big global company, what I learned is it doesn't mean that you always have the voices or the perspectives in the room. Um, so now what I do when I come into companies is I make sure that like we're looking at the policies, we're bringing in different perspectives. And to their credit, they were wonderful. It was one of those like they just didn't have that in their perspective, like in their toolkit, right? And once they did, they worked well with us, and we're very open to how can we change this to make it more inclusive.
Sure. Well, I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
We're going to move into the final segment here, which is called Marissa's Advice Corner. Okay, I'm going to ask you a
Oh,
few
great.
questions. You're going to give advice on a few topics.
I'm ready, Anthony.
All right, let's do it. So, what advice would you give to your former self?
I would say stop waiting for someone to give you permission. Like you can be the leader that you've been looking for. No one's going to tell you to do it though. Like you just have to do it.
What advice would you have for somebody who's about to be a parent but still has a career they want to focus on?
To think about what's really important in the moment. Like our career is long, very long, God willing. Our kids' lives at home with us is short. So
What's the best advice you've ever received?
honestly, probably that. My mom, shout out to my mom, said that to me again before we had kids that like your career is long, your kids' lives is short. Um, so consider that. And I think about that all the time.
Final question. What advice do you have for me as a father of a 2-month-old daughter?
Oh, so I'm sure everyone says to you to soak it in, like soak it
They
up,
do. They do.
right? They're like, just be, and you're like, yeah, I'm so tired. How do I even do that?
Yeah.
um, just remember to like think about like your values and what's important and look at where you're spending your time and your energy and just check in on that. Like just like once every few months, like check in on that. Do they match? For me, it was really easy to fall into work. I'm very good at work. I know how to navigate it. Being a new parent, you're learning a ton of new skills. It's exhausting, it's hard. It was easy for me and actually like a kind of a relief to fall back into work and get swept away and save my energy there and then just be depleted for my family. And once I started taking inventory, like and just checking in, right? No shame. Sometimes we need to be more focused on what's going on at work. And I'd say to people, family is the most important thing to me. And so, like, my actions need to be aligned and consistent with that. And it's not always the case. So just think about what's important to you, Anthony, and just check in every once in a while to see like do they match.
All right, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, Marissa, this has been a great conversation. Where can people go to connect with you or learn more about you?
They can find me on LinkedIn /Marissa Dahlson, and I'm happy to connect with anyone. My Instagram is private because I put my kids on there, but
Sure.
LinkedIn. Let's connect on LinkedIn.
Okay, I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Thanks.
All right, Marissa Dawson, ladies and gentlemen. Marissa, thank you.
Thank you.